It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
False flags, pathogen release, global conflict, climate engineering, all are inseparable, all coming from the same core of global control. Political stripes are an orchestrated illusion. All will continue to be ramped up unless or until a far larger percentage of the general population summons the courage to fully awaken and fully face rapidly unfolding, extremely near-term existential threats. And for those that think such threats are only originating from outside our borders, think again. On the wider horizon, toxic hydrological cycle manipulation and breakdown, the potential final catastrophic collapse of pollinator populations and insects as a whole. Crop collapse is accelerating. Even farmed fish are collapsing, along with wild stocks which have long since collapsed. Mad Max realities are looming large. For over 15 years, Geoengineeringwatch.org has desperately warned about the cards power structures would increasingly play as the breakdown of the planet's life support systems became exponential, and it has. While far too many continue to pretend a new chapter of arranging deck chairs on the Titanic is going to magically make everything better, with zero attention paid to the absolute bottom line. A planet that functions. A planet that supports life, without which we all perish. Further, tragically, the same individuals and groups are blindly waving their flags in full, unquestioning support of the very control centers and political actors that are actually orchestrating false flags, pathogen releases, global conflict, and climate engineering. And this is on all sides of the orchestrated political divide. While grandstanding completely manipulated, highly publicized, and highly polarizing issues, they, the power structure, ultimately those that print the money, are doubling down on the very existential threats which hold our collective futures in the balance. Look here, don't look there. That's what they want. And sadly, the ploy works for far too many. Why are so many so asleep at the wheel? Because the cancer of control tells the masses what they want to hear, pacifying lies in lieu of bitter truths. What kind of bitter truths? Stay tuned and find out. Look up. There's nowhere to hide from what's taking place in our skies, which, for the record, continues to be radically ramped up. In addition to known toxic climate engineering elements, what else could be coming down through our breathable air column? How many really want to know? Marburg bat virus with 88% fatality rate has spread to another country. That's from Newsweek. Report states a sample from a remote part in northern Tanzania has tested positive for the highly contagious Marburg disease, a virus with a fatality rate of up to 88%. Let that sink in. 88% mortality rate that now seems to be exhibiting a gain of function characteristic, allowing it to make the jump to humans. Just nature being bad to humans, or something else altogether? How many times have I stated on this broadcast that when the power structure became desperate enough, fearing a mass awakening of populations, the pitchforks and torches moment, what's to stop them from utilizing elements that are already being dispersed into our skies as biological carrier platforms to carry a pathogen like Marburg or Ebola? I've stated that on this broadcast again so many times. The Newsweek report continues. World Health Organization officials have been collaborating with the Tanzanian health authorities to provide support, including the dispatch of expert teams and resources to manage the outbreak. Question: manage the outbreak or monitor it? Testing the water for scheduled releases elsewhere in the world, perhaps. There are hundreds of biolabs around the world that work for the power structure criminal cabals, the same ones that have long since stated their goal of culling populations down to a small fraction of what they are now, something in the range of 500 million. So what happens to the other 7.5 billion? And who gives those at the top of the power structure pyramid, the money printers, the right to choose who lives and who doesn't. Only a passive population can do that. With the planet's primary life support systems failing and the planet no longer able to sustain anywhere near 8+ billion souls, is it even remotely rational to think that those who are truly in power intend to help you stay healthy, to prosper, to multiply further? Weather warfare and biological dispersions, aka silent weapons for quiet wars. So, about the hundreds of biolabs around the world, what do you think these labs are working on, and how could such pathogens be dispersed? Again, look up. Just look up. And keep in mind, polymer fibers and graphene have long since shown up in countless precipitation tests over the continental U.S. Both elements are used as biological carrier platforms, militarily speaking. Translation: platforms to carry a pathogen from the clouds to the ground are in our rain and breathable air column right now. And forgive me for mentioning yet again, for our new listeners, that the world's second most recognized climate engineer, Dr. Ken Caldeira, you can find him online, stated in his own words, one of his tasks for the U.S. Department of Defense was to design methods of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. Geoengineeringwatch.org owns the audio tape of Dr. Caldeira stating this. No speculation here. You can find that on our website. I think it's under Faces of Geoengineering Disinformation. Perhaps that's the report title. I hope. The recording is there. Next, deadly super fog. Let's weave all this together. Threatens Super Bowl Sunday in New Orleans. That's from the UK Daily Mail. The report continues. Super fog is uncommon, though not unheard of. And about that statement, keep in mind, climate engineering operations have been ongoing since immediately after World War II. The report then states, unseasonably warm temperatures are another factor driving up the risk of superfog. This is true, and when chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding is added to the equation of rapidly warming ground surface temperatures in the desperate and dangerous attempt to create short-term toxic surface cooldowns, aka engineered winter, the result certainly would augment superfog. Superfog on steroids, which means the fog isn't just fog, is it? Let's add this. A previous recent report from the UK Daily Mail. Americans say mysterious fog with chemical smell is making them sick just minutes after exposure. The Daily Mail elaborates. People across the U.S. are reporting mysterious fog with a chemical smell that they believe is making them sick within minutes of exposure. They repeat, reports of the unnatural fog began late in December in parts of Texas, Wisconsin, Iowa, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Florida, and Minnesota. There's more. The reports have sparked a wave of conspiracy theories that are currently sweeping social media. People who subscribe to that theory of comparing the fog to Operation Sea Spray, a secret U.S. Navy biological warfare experiment that sprayed massive amounts of bacteria into the air 2 miles off the coast of San Francisco, California. This is an ongoing story. Again, the fog banks keep returning because they're doubling down on chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding, toxic surface cooldowns, masking the true severity of damage already done to the planet by paradoxically inflicting even more damage and many consequences on the ground, and this is one of them. And to call this a conspiracy theory, again, it shows who Matrix Media serves. It's not a theory, it's already proven historical precedent. Question, how many are desperately clinging to the unimaginably naive notion that the true controllers of the Matrix from behind the curtain, aka the money printers, are somehow being ousted by the very same polarizing actors that they, the true controllers, orchestrated into positions of publicly perceived power in the first place? Summary, we're all living in a planetary Truman Show. The last occupant of the White House that actually drew a line in the sand with those that are truly in power was JFK. He was taken out, eliminated, shortly thereafter. Take the time to view Kennedy's final speeches. You'll understand. More on the toxic fog reports, and first keep in mind another quote that I've cited many times on this broadcast. Forgive me for doing so again, but it's important to hear for, again, new listeners, and especially in this context, from former U.S. presidential advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, advisor from Johnson all the way up to 2017 when he finally passed away. Brzezinski stated, with today's technology, it's infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control them, end quote. And that doesn't necessarily mean quick kill, does it? Boiling frogs, with that in mind. One more recent report from the UK Daily Mail. Mysterious fog sweeps US, sparks bioweapons fears amid alarming echoes of secret 1950 military program. Another reiteration of the earlier article, a thick, mysterious fog has descended upon wide swaths of the U.S., sparking fears of another Operation Sea Spray. The aim of the secret biological warfare experiment was to learn how vulnerable U.S. cities like San Francisco would be to a biowarfare attack by terrorists. Did those people in San Francisco consent to that? What do you think? They then say, again, UK Daily Mail, conspiracy theories are running rampant. When Matrix Media resorts to their final fallback accusation of conspiracy theory, you know you're over the target. Also, for the record, even as far back as 1977, I've cited this many times as well, the U.S. military had conducted no less than 239 open-air biological tests over innocent, unknowing U.S. civilians, and please, please, don't believe me. Investigate for yourself. You won't like what you learn. So much for the service personnel oath of protecting U.S. populations from all threats, foreign and domestic. Our military brothers and sisters and their families need to be awakened to the fact that they are participating in their own demise as well as ours. Blindly following orders isn't patriotic. It isn't a sign of honor. It is, in fact, tyranny. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the End of the World as We Know It broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this fight. We must reach a critical mass of awareness. And again, every day counts in this fight. Starting a conversation on climate engineering that leads people to a credible source of data is paramount. Geoengineering Watch will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. Keep it basic, simple, verifiable, the building blocks of this issue. For the average person, if they can't accept what they can see with their own eyes occurring in our skies, the dispersions coming from nozzles, which film footage at geoengineeringwatch.org proves conclusively, retrofit nozzles mounted on wing pylons aimed in the exhaust jet stream to make this look like, quote, condensation, which it is not. Dispersions being turned on and off. Because the vast majority can't or won't yet accept what they can see with their own eyes, you cannot go too deep into the rabbit hole here. It should be enough for them to know that they're breathing toxic elements in the air and they can see those dispersions occurring. Let them find their own way further into the rabbit hole, but keep it on the building blocks of this issue, the verifiable building blocks, credible building blocks. That's how you move this fight forward. Credible, straightforward data. A conversation on climate engineering can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials available on our homepage. Our full-color, extremely high-quality printed materials we pass on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. Our goal, my goal, until my last breath, to expose and halt this insanity in our skies. Please help us to sound the alarm. In regard to the chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding cooldowns from sfgate.com, Bay Area wakes to rare snowfall as surging atmospheric river moves in. For the record, the quote weather on the west coast of the U.S. is nothing like historical norms. We have drifting masses of heavily sprayed murk, days of featureless skies, nothing falling out, and at the scheduled time, it starts to drizzle and drip. Temperatures now in winters they're using chemical ice nucleating elements plunge, and frozen material can and often does start to fall at far above freezing temperatures. How does that occur? Patented processes of chemical ice nucleation for weather modification is how. Search the engineering winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. It's completely different. It's a very penetrating cold. It's very unnatural, and this frozen material behaves very unnaturally. Much of it sublimates. It can sit out in the sun for days sometimes and not melt, and when it does melt, often there's little to no moisture below it. Again, that's what we'd expect from a chemically nucleated element. Dry ice being the extreme form of that. There's zero runoff from dry ice. So again, please search the engineering winter section and try to connect this core part of climate engineering that, unfortunately, geoengineeringwatch.org is the only source trying to expose that we know of. We hope that changes. But why are so many ignoring this core part of climate engineering? Because the matrix media sensationalized winter weather headlines fit into the false narratives of global cooling, coming ice age. Those are exactly the narratives the climate engineers want the public to recite. They want to mask the true severity of damage done to the planet until the last possible moment. These flash, crash, cool downs are not nature. It's climate engineering. The report from SFGate then adds this: isolated thunderstorms are possible amongst the snowstorm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? They say falling trees, because the root systems are dying from contaminated precipitation and dead soils, and power outages are likely, and travel could become hazardous, especially for high-profile vehicles on exposed roadways. This is especially true for regions that have received some of the chemically nucleated snow because it contains surfactants. That's what makes soap soap, is surfactants. This is like soap-soaked snow. Is it any wonder that so many people that thought they knew how to drive in snow now can't? Because it's literally like soap-soaked snow. For the record, those that are still clinging to the belief that climate engineering is being used for benevolent purposes, think again. From AccuWeather, evacuation warnings issued in Southern California as heavy rain brings threat of mudslides in areas scarred by wildfires. Next question. Is it just a freak coincidence that so often the flash flooding commences shortly after unprecedented firestorms? You decide. The AccuWeather report continues. The threat is particularly acute in communities like Altadena and the Palisades, where homes sit precariously on steep slopes. There's more. For the second time this year, Southern Californians are evacuating their homes as heavy rain threatens new destruction in areas still recovering from last month's devastating wildfires. They're not still recovering. They will never recover. Acapulco will never recover from Hurricane Otis because Mexico didn't toe the line for the Western power structure, and that hurricane was pumped up from a mediocre tropical depression to the strongest Cat 5 hurricane to ever hit that part of the world, direct hit in less than 24 hours. Lahaina will, of course, never recover either. And about precipitation, climate engineering is far more effective at diminishing and dispersing precipitation even than augmenting it, but both are well within its capability. Again, I cite Project Popeye from the 60s. U.S. military is so effective at controlling precipitation that environmental modification treaties were passed in the 70s forbidding it. Not that anybody pays attention to those treaties. So are we to think they can't do much more effective operations now? Really? Next, from the Weather Channel, climate engineering cover-up actors. Weather pattern delivering winter storms, severe weather, flooding, Arctic air, and record heat. What? Question, is anyone paying attention? Does all that belong together in the same borders? Often it's in very close proximity. Record warmth near or immediately following record cold and snowstorms and back again. And that's exactly what's happening. It's climate engineered weather whack-a-mole at this point as the planet's life support systems completely unravel. Let's add this from phys.org. Unraveling a Paradox. Study explores why extreme cold events persist despite global warming. Here's the bottom line on this. Again, more climate engineering cover-up. The extreme cold events have nothing to do with global warming. It's climate engineering, chemical ice nucleation, cloud seeding operations, patented processes. That's what the extreme flash cold events are from. Please search the engineering winter section, homepage, geoengineeringwatch.org. There is so much there, including images. Pictures of ice balls, for example, on the shores of Lake Michigan and other shores, the Baltic Sea, the Arctic Sea, 75-pound, perfectly spherical, basketball-sized ice balls piled up deep. Not nature. Chemical ice nucleation over those bodies of water. And the ice, chemically nucleated ice, begins to build up around that core, that chemical core. And that's exactly what happens. Thus, the baseball and softball size hail that now is so prolific that insurance policies are being canceled specifically because of hail. And nobody seems to question what's changed. Another from phys.org. Arctic cyclones could be missing link in sea ice depletion models. The report says we're still trying to figure out exactly how sea ice changes will affect any of the extreme weather that is happening right now. They can't figure out anything. We've pointed this out at geoengineeringwatch.org for a decade and a half plus. They've been engineering over the polar regions since the very beginning, since immediately after World War II. And although they can and do reduce some daytime highs, they trap more heat than they deflect, so it's having an overall warming effect, not a cooling, mitigating effect. And the chemical nucleation in the Arctic, again, ongoing for decades, and people assume that Arctic skies should be this featureless white sky, and they think that's normal. It's not. It's climate engineering. Again, for over 3/4 of a century, this has been going on. So people just accept it as normal. One more from phys.org. Antarctic snow harbors microplastics. This is an ongoing story. New technique uncovers hidden pollution. Listen to this, though. Again, it's another case of it's way worse than we thought. The report says it's the first time a new and advanced technique has been used to detect microplastics as small as 11 micrometers, about the size of a red blood cell, in the snow in Antarctica. The study is published this week in the journal Science of the Total Environment. The findings surprised researchers as microplastics were found at concentrations up to 3,099 particles per liter of snow. Most of these particles, 95%, were smaller than 50 micrometers. Again, the size of most human cells, suggesting previous studies have underestimated the extent of microplastic pollution in the region. By how much, though? Here's how much. We found microplastic abundance in these snow samples to be 100 times higher than previously thought. Well, they only missed by 100 times. 10,000% worse than they thought. Research suggests that microplastics could affect the snow's albedo, aka how much light it reflects, and how quickly it melts. It's certainly affected because chemical nucleating elements are being used everywhere. Again, sublimation a part of the equation. That's why there's not nearly as much runoff. That's why even with Snowmageddon 2 years ago, California's right back in drought again. The whole natural hydrological cycle completely derailed at this point. Here's a reminder of this report from CBC Canada, published late last year. Tiny and unregulated UFPs, that's ultrafine particles, have the potential to cause major health problems. Of course they do. Smaller the particle, the more lethal it is. The report says when we talk about air pollution, most of us probably think about smog or the smoke associated with wildfires, but scientists are learning more about a category of pollutants that are smaller in stature, yet potentially more dangerous. The report states they're called ultrafine particles, again, UFPs. And again, follow me through with this because this corroborates so much of what I stated for so many years in this broadcast. They say 1,000 times thinner than a strand of hair. Actually, they're much smaller than that. You can fit up to 100,000 nanometers across the width of a single human hair. UFPs are emitted by vehicles and industrial activity, and because they don't say this in the article, of course, it's the primary element in climate engineering patents, of which it is estimated, based on lab testing extrapolation, that there's 40 to 60 million tons of these particles being dispersed globally as part of climate intervention operations. And according to a recent study, the report says, led by researchers at McGill University in Montreal, these UFPs contribute to more than 1,000 premature deaths a year in that city and Toronto alone. Owing to their size, these nanoparticles can be breathed into the lungs and passed into the bloodstream. They've also been found in people's brains in copious quantities, by the way, which I've covered in previous broadcasts. So the report says they certainly have access to our entire system in terms of where they can reach. Compared to fine particles, ultrafine particles cause more pulmonary inflammation and are retained longer in the lung. I've stated this so many times over so many years. They're far more bioavailable and far more bioaccumulative, easy to absorb, hard to purge from the system. The study says UFPs have been found to cause cardiovascular disease and are linked to cancer and diabetes in adults. Exposure can also lead to greater rates of babies with low birth rates. Researchers have known about UFPs for several decades, the report states, but no one around the world regulates them. Think about that. How many times have I said that on this broadcast? The entire system is designed not to show these ultrafine particles. It's not an accident. This mountain of highly toxic material, the most toxic material, goes completely under the radar and undisclosed. That's not an accident. The report then states airports are a larger source of UFPs. Imagine that. I wonder why. During periods of aircraft operation, they say the study found momentary UFP spikes exceeding 100,000 particles per cubic centimeter. That's a massive amount of material. Again, we have peer-reviewed study, recent study, stating depending on the location and conditions, we may be inhaling up to 20 million particles per breath. Try to conceptualize that. Again, go outside, dark night, after heavy aerosol operations, hazy skies, get away from any light pollution, brightest light you can find, aim it up the sky, and look straight up through that beam. You have to see it to believe it. Looks like you're in a blizzard, and you cannot see it during the daytime. The report then says, as the transport and environment study showed, people living near airports are especially affected by UFPs. Imagine that again. From chemicalandengineeringnews.com, let's add this: how solar geoengineering may change our skies. Really? Who would have thought? They say a new study simulates how the sky might look to the casual observer after stratospheric aerosol geoengineering. And what did their pictures look like? Exactly what we see. They were probably actual pictures. And they're telling us it might look like if they someday disperse climate engineering. We live in an asylum. I don't have the words anymore. How people can stay so asleep at the wheel while we're literally under assault. Is it not a fight for life if you can't walk outside and take a breath without sucking up all this toxic material? They say add aerosols to the stratosphere. Again, this is from this geoengineering report from chemicalandengineeringnews.com. Add aerosols to the stratosphere and sunlight is reflected into space, cooling Earth's surface. Volcanoes have done it, so why can't humans? ? How does this narrative even continue? Because it's already been scientifically proven that volcanoes only create temporary toxic cooling, followed immediately by an even worse warming because of the damage those particles do to the atmosphere, to the hydrological cycle. And why does the so-called climate science community continue to pretend that this is some potential solution when it's simply a form of covert weather warfare? This pathetic disinformation report from Chemical and Engineering News continues with this: scientists believe that stratospheric aerosol injection could help mitigate the worst effects of global warming. Others say unintended consequences from stratospheric aerosol injection and the lack of strict international governance to ensure the technology is not abused make it too risky to consider. How can they pretend that this hasn't been ongoing for over 3/4 of a century? And they say there could be some unintended consequences. Really, you think? Scattering tens of millions of tons of highly toxic particles ubiquitously around the planet that destroy the planet's protective atmosphere, disrupt the hydrological cycle, contaminate virtually everything, every living thing on the ground. And they say some unintended consequences could occur. Researchers have simulated what the sky may look like. Again, went over that earlier. The pictures look exactly like what we see every day in many locations. The brightness and color of the sky changed. Although sky whitening is cited by some as a concerning visual effect, this report states, the team's results suggest that changes to twilight, to sunsets, and to the solar auroras, the bright white glow around the sun, will be far more noticeable. That's painfully noticeable already. Block the sun out with your hand on a heavy spray day, and you can see the halo around the sun. The new work offers a precise measurement of how stratospheric aerosol injection deployments may change the sky's appearance. Already has. Climate scientist Alan Robach. By the way, if you watch the Dimming documentary at geoengineeringwatch.org for free on the homepage, 25 million views and counting, the standard for this subject, and you see me confront Dr. David Keith, Alan Robach, the scientist just mentioned, is in that photo as well, standing next to Mr. Keith, clarifying the question I asked of Mr. Keith. These people are all part of this cover-up, all of them. How do they face themselves in the mirror? How do they look their children in the eyes? I don't know. I truly don't know. But one can't help but believe that as climate engineering is finally fully exposed, and a justifiably outraged population takes to the streets with their proverbial pitchforks and torches, looking for any that actively or passively participated not just in the operations, but in the criminal cover-up of the same, how will these people explain their position, their emphatic denial of these atrocities? And we're told they're experts, and we're trained and taught from birth to believe these so-called experts that have no interest in the truth. They serve the controllers of the matrix. Report then says it shows that if you put a lot of stuff in the stratosphere, people will notice. Yeah, they have. This is particularly true for those living in areas with low air pollution. There is no such areas, not anymore. Scientist Alan Robach then says, changing the way the sky looks might rub some people the wrong way. That's a direct quote. Really, Alan? It's done far more than that. This is my mission in life, to expose people like you, Mr. Robach, who are doing your best to deceive populations that are literally under siege. From the Weather Channel Climate Engineering Cover-Up Association, February frenzy, U.S. to remain under winter storm siege. That's true. Just said that. A frenetic weather pattern will send persistent winter storms across more than 20 states through the end of February. This is simply a conveyor. The climate engineering set up a conveyor with manipulated atmospheric pressure zones. They have certain regions where it's easier for them to continue to chemically nucleate. Snowstorms pile it up in a few select locations, create sensationalized headlines from that. Erie, Pennsylvania, Buffalo, New York, places like that. Lake effect snow from the record warm Great Lakes. And they do it again and again and again because they can. AccuWeather Chief Meteorologist John Porter said that there would be a February frenzy of storms every few days in many places because he's reading a script. That's exactly what he's doing, a script passed down from Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, private defense contractors that are neck deep in climate engineering operations and patents, and they do the scripts because the narrative needs to match. And the non-disclosure and gag orders on National Weather Service and NOAA because they're reading the same scripts. Whole system, top to bottom, completely manipulated. AccuWeather's team of long-range experts accurately predicted in September of last year that February would be an exceptionally active month for winter weather impacts across the country, especially in the Northeast. Are you kidding me? They can't predict a day in advance, and we're told they can predict months in advance. Again, they are reading a script of the scheduled weather, period. Where is honor in our society? I'm definitely on the wrong planet. I can't imagine how these people live with themselves. I can't imagine. They say this forecast from September is unfolding as expected. That's from AccuWeather senior meteorologist Joe Lundberg. Perhaps Joe needs to get a link to the dimming, or maybe 100 links from 100 different people would be even better. The winter storm siege began last week, the report says, as a storm unleashed snow, ice, and slippery travel. And they name these storms, of course, every single one to make it more theatrical. And when they mentioned snow, ice, and slippery travel, just talked about that, surfactants in the snow. Not guessing, not speculating, not theorizing, lab test proven. Anyone who's lived in snow historically, before there was so much climate engineering going on, knows the difference. The same storm also caused damaging and deadly thunderstorms in Kentucky and Tennessee. This is back to the warm side of the cold winter storm and the cold side of the cold winter storm having nothing to do with elevation anymore. You're either on the warm side or the cold side, and sometimes you can throw a rock between the two. Does anyone possibly think that's normal or natural? Because it isn't. They say snow and ice will abound from the southern plains to the northeast this week, to the south, and there will be rounds of rain and thunderstorms, again, the warm side of the so-called winter storm. Parts of the southeast experiencing repeated downpours could receive over half a foot of rain. They need a lot of moisture to carry out these operations because these endothermic reacting elements tend to dry up much of the precipitation. That's why we have snow droughts everywhere in the northeast. In spite of all the winter storms that keep parading over and over and over, there's still a massive snow drought. Why? What's wrong with this picture? Climate engineering is what's wrong. They say the path of each storm will be crucial in determining whether areas along Interstate 95 corridor or the Northeast will receive primarily snow, ice, or rain. Another factor, as they're pushing the warm moisture north, many times out of the record warm Gulf of Mexico, and they're chemically nucleating, there's an ice storm transition zone between the warm flows of moisture and where various forms of frozen material finally start falling. The chemically nucleated moisture between those zones, again, hits the surface before it sets up. And thus you have now every time ice storms in the transition zone between the warm side of the cold winter storm and the cold side of the quote winter storm. They say that the barrage of storms will lead to widespread disruption for millions in the plains states to the Atlantic seaboard, including hazardous commutes, school days, and cancellations of business supply chain interruptions, travel days at major airports. These disruptions may be intensified by the successive nature of the storms. How is this not winter weather warfare? Next, another article on how to bring populations to their knees without those populations ever even knowing they're under assault. From AccuWeather, atmospheric river looms, torrential rain, flooding, mudslides to unfold in California. Elaboration of what I covered earlier. A fast-moving potent storm will deliver inches of rain and feet of Sierra snow. Yes, the chemically nucleated kind. The rain will have dangerous, damaging, and disruptive consequences, the report states. The biggest storm of winter, packing a fire hose of rain across much of California, will trigger flooding, mudslides, and road closures. The AccuWeather report then states, much of the storm's rain is likely to fall in 12 hours or less. Some of the rain runoff will be toxic. And then they state, since the start of the rainy season in October, Southern California has only received 5 to 35% of its historical average rainfall. Now it's coming all at once. And no one can rationally deny that climate engineering is playing a factor here, because we can see their operations on satellite imagery, and we know that since the 60s, so effective at controlling precipitation that they had to pass international treaties forbidding them. You can't tell me that they don't have a hand in this. We can see their operations on satellite imagery, and yet we have all the so-called experts and so-called elected officials, especially in California, denying this, and that's on both sides of the orchestrated political divide, both sides. I've met with everyone from Gavin Newsom to Congressman Doug LaMalfa in Northern California, and his staff, again, used to call me at home on the weekends. They were so upset about this issue until one of their staff told me they were told to shut up, and that's exactly what they did. Cowards. Society's full of cowards, especially in the political system. And the constant wind chill temp maps, many times they hide the wind chill part in the top corner so people see these horrifically low temperatures. It's a wind chill, has nothing to do with the ambient temperature, but they try to hide that in that way. Next, also from Weather Channel, the Climate Engineering Cover-Up Organization, Spring Forecast 2025, U.S. faces split between warm weather and lingering chill. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Where the lizards were just falling out of the trees from the blizzards in Florida, went straight to record high temperatures, and nobody questions anything. Same with the whole Gulf Coast. We had temperatures in Texas where it just snowed in blizzard conditions not long ago, and temperatures pushing 100 recently. Nobody questions anything. Why not? Are we going to stay asleep at the wheel until the moment of impact? This is a fight for life, and it's up to us. How do we face our children unless we engage fully in this battle to preserve some future for our posterity? Because on the current course, mathematically, statistically, they have none. None. This report says the first weeks of spring may feel more like winter across the northern half of the United States. There will be a turbulent transition between the seasons. This is all script. It's all script. The report continues, getting to the crop-crushing part of the winter weather warfare. They say lingering wintry weather will be a concern for farmers and gardeners alike across the east with late frost. A late frost is also possible across the Carolinas in March. How in the world would they know that? Which can lead to some damage and to sensitive plants. Frosty mornings will be common across the Ohio Valley, central Appalachians, and interior Northeast. This is all script. This is all part of the scheduled weather, period. They say the threat for frost may last into early, middle part of May. As long as they have enough moisture, they can drop those temperatures down on the surface to very low numbers, and that's a very shallow layer of surface cold. Up above, and you see these agencies trying to explain why there's so much freezing rain with these elaborate, deceptive models. It's chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. And for those that say it's just winter, it's happening all over the Northern Hemisphere, no, guess again. Take the time to find the departure from normal surface temperature maps for January of this year, which is the warmest January ever recorded, and take a look at the entire planet is red above normal temperatures except the eastern two-thirds of the U.S. lower 48 states. That's not some freak coincidence. It's climate engineering from by far the biggest military on the planet, the most funded military on the planet, the military with 3 times more aerial tankers than all other militaries on the planet combined. That's what it's from. Find that map and try to explain it away as just some natural coincidence. About the trees, the insects, all dying. The toxic rain is part of that. The damaged atmosphere and the extreme UV radiation, it's bombarding all of us, part of that. So many factors, and we've done many bad things to the planet. I'm not denying that, never have. But how can we talk about climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost addressing the climate engineering elephant in the equation? Report, Colorado forests are releasing more carbon than they capture each year. It's not just Colorado forests, it's forests around the globe. Geoengineering Watch has stated that for a decade and a half. The so-called climate science community now finally starting to admit to it because they can't hide it any longer. These trees are dying. Soil microbiome dead. Root systems dying. That's why trees are tipping over so easily and so readily now. Root systems dying back just like the crowns are dying back. Bioavailable aluminum, which is in our rain. Hundreds of lab tests proven this conclusively. Toxic to all life forms. Period. From Honeybee Health Coalition, this is new, severe and sudden losses of managed bees across the nation. That's from an already radically diminished bee population. Pollinators are all but gone. What are we going to do? That's not a hard blank to fill in if we continue on the current course. And how is the distribution of mammals on planet Earth? Here's some statistics to put it into perspective. Humans are 34% of all mammal biomass. 34%. Livestock and pets, 62% of global mammal biomass. What's left? Wild animals. Mammals, down to a meager 4% of global mammal biomass. We are truly in a dark corner. Insect populations down 80 to 90% right now. Right now. Global pelagic fish populations down 90%. The food fish right now. Let's add this from the UK Independent. Scottish salmon industry misleading consumers on death rates, sea lice, and chemicals. Farm salmon, for those that don't know, one of the most toxic foods you can eat, period. And even the toxic farmed fish is dying at catastrophic levels. Moving on from ABC News, climate change is turning Valentine's Day bitter for chocolate lovers, not just chocolate. It's going to be empty food shelves for many staples very, very soon. Wait and see. Even in first world nations whose populations mistakenly believe their part of the planetary ship isn't sinking. Good luck with that. From MSN, agricultural collapse, how extreme weather threatens global food supplies. Let's add climate engineering. And we see such an incredibly systematic targeting of agricultural regions. This is not an accident. Again, if you think those who truly control the levers of power are here to help you, think again. But so many people don't care. They think, who needs a living planet? We have Walmart and McDonald's and Domino's Pizza for the weekend games. That's where many people are at. That's a recipe for near-term planetary omnicide. From ABC News, forget saving the planet. Clean energy leaders sharpen a new message. Money and jobs. This is a total delusion facade. Perpetual growth and expansion on a finite planet with finite resources. You can wrap it any way you want. You can put as much lipstick on this pig as you want. It's still a pig. First, for those that think, quote, clean energy actually is, take the time to view the documentary film Planet of the Humans. I worked on a solar field there. They show at the 40-minute mark that's now an empty field of blowing sand in the middle of Mojave Desert. Was never viable. And for those that then lay blame because I don't have a magic solution for the path of certain near-term self-annihilation that industrialized, militarized, so-called society has put us on. Newsflash, there is no magic solution for looting, plundering, pillaging, and permanently polluting the formerly thriving miracle planet on which all of our lives completely and totally depend. We start with the biggest priority, stopping toxic climate disruption operations, and then we can reassess our situation. Unless all the data is being hidden from us, of course, which is now starting to occur. From Axios.com, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration told to search grant programs for climate-related terms. They're trying to sweep everything under the rug. And if you think these people are going to expose and halt climate engineering, think again. They're only ramping it up further. From the UK Guardian, NOAA imposes limits on scientists, sparking concerns over global forecasts. Again, one more form of non-disclosure. U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has placed onerous new restrictions on its scientists that people in the agency say could hamper the quality of availability of the world's weather forecast. They're doing nothing but hide climate engineering anyway because they have this looming threat of penalty over their heads if they talk. I had a NOAA scientist state to my face, quote, "We all know what's going on. We have no First Amendment protection. We don't know what to do." And now that's being made worse in recent weeks, not better. It's called hide the severity of what's unfolding before the herd panics. I have no love for NOAA. But even more censorship and even more climate engineering will seal our collective fate far sooner than almost any yet dare to imagine. On that note of good cheer, you're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News broadcast, installment number 497, February 15th, 2025. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Hour broadcast can be found on the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes and proves the climate engineering atrocities. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience about reaching those that still aren't looking up. Start a conversation. Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials can be the key to that door. They can be found on our homepage. Our only goal, provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. Again, we pass on our extremely high-quality, full-color printed materials, shocking images for less than our overall cost of printing and shipping. We have scannable business cards, bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue, reaching a critical mass. Again, the only way forward in this fight. It is the great imperative. If we can expose it, we can stop it from the inside out. And if we do, there will be a shockwave around the world. Wait and see. Our problems aren't over, not by a long shot. They're just beginning. But we will have taken a quantum leap in the right direction, and that is worth fighting for until our last breath. To all those that have steadfastly committed themselves to exposing and halting the climate engineering insanity, you will always have my deepest gratitude forever. Moving on, it's all orchestrated circus, matrix media, the whole political everything, a theater of the absurd from the current administration all the way back to JFK. Divide, distract, polarize, and conquer. And in the meantime, it's full throttle with the remaining resources on a rapidly dying planet. On that note from the UK Guardian, U.S. Senate confirms fracking CEO Chris Wright to be Trump's energy secretary. No conflict of interest there, is there? There is no climate crisis, he said, and we're not in the midst of an energy transition either. Wright has written extensively on the need for more carbon fuel production to lift people out of poverty. Really, how's that going? How about more carbon fuel to make sure those geoengineering jets keep flying? Does it sound like this is the kind of scenario that's going to expose climate engineering, which is actually used by those also involved with the carbon fuel industry to help mask the severity of damage being done to the planet with their chemical cooldowns, shockingly obvious in the continental U.S., above the rest of the world, the only blue spot for the whole month of January on a red world for surface temperatures. From biologicaldiversity.org, Trump's interior order threatens to open Grand Canyon National Monument to new uranium mining. Wow, what a great idea. Let's turn the Grand Canyon into an open pit uranium mine. That'll definitely make America great again and healthy again. From wilderness.org, opening the Grand Canyon area to uranium mining is a horrible idea. I would agree. In regard to places on the planet that have long since been permanently polluted, from preventionweb.net, rapidly warming Arctic could cause spread of nuclear waste, undiscovered viruses, and dangerous chemicals, new report finds. Yes, the nuclear dumping in the Arctic is thawing out, along with the rest of the unfolding planetary meltdown, with the on and off exception of the U.S. lower 48 states that are receiving, again, the brunt of chemical ice nucleation, cloud seeding, engineered winter weather cooldowns, thanks to the U.S. military juggernaut that has a budget bigger than the next 10 biggest militaries combined. Thus, the U.S. military has 3 times more aerial jet tankers than all other militaries in the world combined. Think geoengineering jet tanker. Let that sink in. And about the new novel dangerous viruses that so-called science community is always blaming on thawing permafrost. Pay no attention to the hundreds of biolabs around the world that are engineering exactly the types of pathogens that are being blamed on melting tundra. Move along. Nothing to see here. For the record, global sea ice continues to plunge further and further into record low territory. And no, it isn't just a cycle. Again, that comparison is, as I've described so many times before, like running someone over in a crosswalk, beating them, stabbing them, burning them, shooting them, and then claiming they died of natural causes. Good luck making that argument in court. From Inside Climate News, directive from new Interior Secretary weakens public land protections to push carbon fuels. No surprise. From levernews.com, chemical companies ask Trump's EPA to hide potential disasters. How many times have I said this on this broadcast? It's not just this administration, it's all of them. Political theater is just to divide the population. That's their job, to hide threats from the public, not to disclose them. This report states the chemical industry is asking the Environmental Protection Agency, now held by industry-friendly Trump appointee Lee Zeldin, to hide chemical facilities at the highest risk of disaster and their safety records from public view, just like they're doing with the weather records right now. What a surprise. Just like the Dick Cheney-sponsored fracking brew, hundreds of highly toxic chemicals, most of which the frackers are no longer even obligated to disclose, permanently polluting aquifers all over the world. What a great idea. Isn't it perplexing that many of the same, quote, activists that claim to be against climate engineering are in full support of drill, baby, drill? Question, is it not yet clear that the same core of power is behind both activities? From reneweconomy.com, carbon fuel subsidies now more than $2 trillion just in G7 countries alone. So it's not enough that the carbon fuel corporations are decimating the planet to make obscene profits. They have to get $2 trillion in subsidies. And how many Americans, again, waving their flags in full support of the final nails being pounded into our collective coffins if we continue this business as usual, which includes climate engineering, because so much of the carbon fuel is going for exactly that and the same core of power behind all of it. The human race is pedal to the metal in the fast lane, destination planetary omnicide, likely taking the entire web of life down with us on the current course. Question. How do far too many, unfortunately, choose to respond when faced with news of converging existential threats? When faced with an existential threat, humans often utilize psychological defense mechanisms to manage the overwhelming anxiety and fear by distorting reality, by clinging to beliefs or denying the threat's severity, essentially protecting their sense of self and meaning in the face of potential annihilation. These defenses can include things like denial, projection, identification with a group, or clinging to a strongly held worldview. In regard to psychological defense mechanisms against existential threats, there's terror management theory. This psychological concept explains how humans use defense mechanisms to cope with the awareness of their mortality and the potential for existential threats, often by bolstering their self-esteem and worldview. Common defense mechanisms: denial, refusing to acknowledge the severity or reality of the threat; rationalization, creating what the denier believes to be logical explanations to minimize the threat's impact; projection, attributing one's own anxieties onto others, aka kill the messenger. There is regression, returning to childlike behaviors or coping mechanisms; identification with the group, strengthening ties to a group or community to feel more secure; compartmentalization, which is separating threatening thoughts from daily life. What about impact on behavior? These defenses can manifest in various ways, like increased aggression, seeking out distractions, clinging to rigid belief systems, or engaging in risky behaviors. And about those at the top of the power structure pyramid. Psychopathic personalities can be characterized by a boldness and a drive to assert dominance over others. Psychopathic personality, a personality type that can include traits like impulsivity, sensation-seeking, poor planning, and aggressiveness. Psychopathic leaders may be motivated to seek out leadership positions because these positions enable them to fulfill their need to dominate and control others. A final factor in regard to those at the top of the food chain, those who truly control the levers of power from behind the curtain, aka the money printers. In the timeless words of George Carlin, it's a big club and you're not in it. Keep that in mind. But as I've stated so many times, they are not gods, and we are not helpless. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Please, don't sit on the sidelines at this most critical moment in time, thinking that someone else is going to move the fight forward for you. All of us are needed in this most critical battle for everything that we hold dear. All of us are spokes in the wheel. All of us needed to make it move forward. If you want unshakable solace, use the time you've been given wisely for the good of the whole, for the good of your posterity and theirs, which will never be short of a complete and immediate course correction by our species. All of us are responsible to constantly keep clear the lens through which we see the world. We must constantly struggle against program ideology, bias, and preconception. We must try to see the world as it really is, and as it very soon will be, unless we completely alter our current course and turn this tide. Please check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to move this fight forward. Every single day matters at this point. Please make your voice heard. Make every single day count. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.